A gateway exists within our solar system that swings open in a single direction. You possess the ability to step across its threshold. Devices forged by human ingenuity have already crossed its boundary. Yet the second you pass through, the laws of nature silently seal at your back, potentially forever. That portal is the planet Mars. Before we proceed, I need you to observe a peculiar detail, a fact that has remained concealed in full view throughout your whole existence. Whenever we discuss journeying to the red planet, we frame it exactly like a standard vacation, an arduous expedition, an extended voyage, a freezing and isolated endeavor. Nevertheless, a round-trip excursion, leaving boot prints, planting a banner, and subsequently heading back to ticker-tape parades and triumphant celebrations. This vision seems so intuitive, so inherently logical, that virtually no one pauses to doubt it. This evening, I will demonstrate to you that this assumption is entirely false, not just marginally inaccurate, fundamentally flawed in a manner that could abandon a living, breathing person marooned on an alien sphere, near enough to gaze upon Earth as a luminous azure speck in the twilight heavens, yet distant enough that they could never physically reach it again. Furthermore, the cause has absolutely zero connection to mileage. It is encoded within one specific mathematical formula, and the moment you comprehend it, your perspective on that crimson ore will be permanently altered. Consider this reality that ought to freeze you in your tracks. Arriving at the Martian surface and departing from it do not constitute two sides of an identical coin. They do not even belong to the same category of challenge. We have basically mastered the first half. The second half remains entirely unaccomplished. Not by a spacefarer, not by an automated probe, not by a solitary artifact constructed throughout the complete timeline of humanity. Ponder that reality for a moment. We have successfully touched down on the red planet repeatedly. Robotic explorers, stationary modules, and entire mobile research facilities comparable to automobiles. Making landfall has grown to be practically standard procedure. We excel at this task. However, absolutely nothing has ever lifted off in the Martian dirt and returned to Earth. Not a massive rock, not a tiny stone, not one individual particle of crimson sand. Each victorious image you have ever witnessed of that world, every robotic self-portrait set against those oxidized dunes, captures a device that traveled there permanently. It remains parked precisely at its touchdown site, forever immobilized for the remainder of the world's lifespan. Touching down boasts an extensive and honorable legacy. Taking off possesses absolutely no track record, a flawless, uninterrupted streak of zero. Consequently, the genuine inquiry regarding the red planet was never whether we could reach it. We undeniably possess that capability. The query that ought to truly keep you up at night is the one practically nobody has the courage to vocalize. Should you make the journey, would you ever be able to depart? Prior to unraveling this concept completely, I have one brief and sincere request. Should this platform have ever expanded your perspective, a super thanks sustains these profound explorations, and I acknowledge each individual contribution. Furthermore, if you desire to engage more intimately with the content, joining as a member requires just a single click. The URL is provided below. Returning now to that metaphorical gateway. To grasp why departure could be unfeasible, you must initially comprehend why we originally believed it would be simple. This presumption originates from a completely logical standpoint. Humanity has accomplished this feat previously. 50 years in the past, people traveled to an alien sphere, strolled across its terrain, re-entered their vessel, launched from its ground, and returned to Earth breathing. Not merely a single occasion, but on 6 distinct missions, the lunar surface stands as evidence etched into our shared consciousness that it is possible to explore another celestial body and come back to share the tale. Thus, when we envision a red planet, our brains merely take that recollection and extend it across a greater distance, envisioning a more extended voyage over more crimson soil. At a core level, however, we presume the identical framework for the expedition. This constitutes the snare, as the very factor that allowed our lunar return cannot endure the transit to the Martian surface. The logic silently disintegrates the second you substitute one celestial body for the next. We successfully return from the lunar surface, primarily due to a single factor. Earth's satellite is remarkably diminutive. Its gravitational pull is so incredibly weak that the apparatus required to break free from its crust could be almost laughably miniature. A compact launch module, sufficiently lightweight to transport across the void, fully constructed and preloaded with propellant, resting beneath the crew's feet throughout the mission, simply biding its time. The explorers were not required to manufacture a single component on the alien dirt. They possessed no obligation to synthesize even 1 ounce of propellant. They carried their return vehicle along for the ride, and dragging that modest capsule across 250,000 miles hardly impacted the massive payload the primary booster was already elevating. Returning from the lunar surface was, from a technical perspective, practically a secondary consideration, a minor concession the satellite was gracious enough to permit. The Red Planet will offer no such leniency. To comprehend the rationale behind this, you must internalize the most crucial concept within this entire narrative, a notion that, bizarrely, possesses absolutely no relation to physical span. Mileage was never the true adversary. The cosmos is overwhelmingly devoid of matter, and navigating a vacuum is straightforward. You simply glide to the void, plummeting through the vacuum at virtually zero cost. The authentic foe is gravitational force and the physical geometry it sculpts throughout the universe. Each celestial body possessing weight rests at the base of an imperceptible cone. Visualize a dense sphere placed in the middle of a taut elastic membrane, descending and dragging the material into a profound depression surrounding it. The greater the mass of the planet, the more profound and sheer that gravitational well becomes. To reach a planetary surface, you merely glide down the interior of its depression, allowing gravitational pull to perform the labor on your behalf. It eagerly drags you downward, never demanding a single unit of compensation. Conversely, to depart, you are forced to scale the complete incline from the absolute nadir, using your own thrust, dragging your own machinery, and igniting your own propellant across every inch of the ascent. This introduces a fundamental imbalance that silently dictates the destiny of every astronaut who has ever existed. Descending requires minimal effort, whereas ascending demands a devastatingly, brutally high price. The universe distributes landings at no cost while extracting an astronomical toll for every single launch. For the lunar surface, that toll amounted to mere spare coins. However, on the Red Planet, a sphere with a velocity required to break orbit exceeds twice that of Earth's satellite. The cost escalates into a territory where we genuinely cannot ascertain if an abandoned team could ever gather the resources to pay it. Therefore, place yourself directly into that scenario, as this is a point where theoretical physics transforms into a visceral sensation in your heart. You find yourself planted on the Martian crust. The expedition was a success. You navigated the dark void. You endured the deafening plunge through an incredibly sparse gaseous envelope. You genuinely took steps upon an alien world. At this juncture, your only desire is to return to Earth. In that precise second, every physical law that assisted your arrival actively opposes you. The identical gravitational force that so graciously dragged you downward now anchors you to the dirt with maximum intensity. To escape, you are required to fire what is essentially a massive orbital booster straight off unrefined, freezing, wind-swept soil, lacking any support gantry, lacking any refueling personnel, lacking any solid foundation, lacking any command center monitoring screens a short distance away, possessing only the supplies you transported through the vacuum, or whatever materials you can miraculously extract from the alien dirt and sky. The most agonizing aspect of this entire ordeal is that your homeworld remains visible constantly. Our planet dangles in the alien heavens as an isolated, luminous azure speck, entirely distinct, more stable, and sharper than any surrounding celestial body. You might remain there during twilight, observing it evening after evening, gradually internalizing the most silently crushing reality a person has ever been forced to endure, namely, that gazing upon Earth and physically returning to it have morphed into two entirely, irrevocably separate concepts. At this point, the logical reaction to this predicament seems clear. Granted, the task is arduous, yet difficult does not equate to unachievable. We strategize, we equip ourselves, and we transport the necessary supplies. Allow me to present a genuine strategy for coming back. As at first glance, it appears flawless, perhaps even brilliant. Initially, Consider the schedule, which remains entirely outside your control. Both our home world and the red planet orbit the central star at varying velocities along distinct paths. Consequently, a transit back to Earth is solely feasible when these two spheres rotate into the precise geometric configuration, an arrangement that manifests approximately once every 2 years and 2 months. Fail to capitalize on that time frame for absolutely any cause, and your subsequent chance to launch is delayed by over 24 complete months. 24 months of enduring on a sphere that is deliberately, methodically attempting to end your life, all while a limited reserve of oxygen, hydration, sustenance, and energy continuously depletes. Next, consider propellant. This specific element is a component that silently shatters the entire strategy. You are unable to merely load your departure propellant and transport it from our homeworld, as the massive volume required is so staggering that it transforms into an unmanageable payload, far too weighty to launch initially. Therefore, the primary blueprints reject the idea of bringing it along. As an alternative, they manufacture it directly on the red planet, utilizing the planet's own resources. Automated systems deployed in advanced siphon carbon dioxide directly from the sparse atmosphere, harvest moisture from subterranean glaciers, and combine them within a synthetic processor to generate methane and breathable air. Genuine, functional booster fuel synthesized on a crust of foreign sphere prior to the astronauts' touchdown. Theoretically, the circular journey is complete. It is undeniably ingenious, yet it relies on a filament so fragile it can scarcely support its own mass. This is because every single connection in that sequence must operate perfectly, entirely unassisted for extended periods, without any personnel present to fix malfunctions. The more profound reality is that the actual obstacle was never the strategy itself. The true adversary consists of the natural laws the blueprint is frantically attempting to overcome. Permit me to demonstrate the precise mathematical principle that transforms a difficult task into a potentially eternal impossibility. For once you comprehend it, you'll forever recognize its influence on every object that attempts to achieve flight. The expense of breaking free from a celestial body is not determined by the sheer size of your launch vehicle. It is dictated by a principle known as the Tsiolkovsky rocket equation. This formula conceals a merciless yet elegant characteristic. The propellant required does not increase at a linear rate as you request greater velocity. It expands at an exponential magnitude. Demand a slight increase in velocity, and certainly you require additional propellant. However, that supplementary liquid possesses its own mass. Consequently, you now demand even more propellant simply to elevate that initial extra mass. Furthermore, the secondary propellant also carries its own heaviness. Thus, you require yet another layer of fuel to hoist it. The requirement continuously consumes itself, spiraling upward in a runaway cascade. Beyond a specific threshold, the launch vehicle morphs into almost pure liquid energy, encasing a minuscule fragment of genuine astronauts and payload. This explains precisely why the red planet balances directly on a razor-thin precipice. To inch away from the lunar surface, you only had to achieve a velocity of roughly 2.5 kilometers per second. To ascend from a Martian crust, you require a speed approaching 5, approximately twice as much. Yet, due to that exponential trajectory, multiply your required velocity by 2 does not merely multiply your propellant by 2. It amplifies the necessary volume by a factor of many. The disparity between the lunar surface and the red planet is not a gentle incline on a flight of stairs. Measured in the sole metric that truly counts, it represents an astronomical vertical bound. Exactly this, is the reason you are forced into the frantic compromise of landing with depleted reservoirs and synthesizing your departure mechanism from the very ground you stand upon. Allow that reality to permeate your thoughts for a second, as it forms the silent core of the entire dilemma. During the lunar missions, the propellant constituted a minor percentage of the vehicle. Conversely, on a red planet, the liquid energy transforms into the colossal majority of everything you must miraculously synthesize, while the astronauts it is designed to rescue diminish to a statistical anomaly perched atop a colossal peak of combustible fluid. This does not represent a mere logistical annoyance. This is the mathematical formula etching a boundary into the crimson sand and challenging humanity to step over it. Therefore, Allow me to transport you back to that alien terrain one last time to ground the concept, as sterile statistics maintain too much emotional distance. A short distance from your living quarters rests the solitary most vital apparatus in the cosmos from your perspective, your launch module, your singular and exclusive ticket back to Earth. However, its reservoirs are not brimming with propellant you transported from your home world. They are designed to be replenished by that automated plant, the system that has been operating silently since prior to your touchdown, harvesting gas from the atmosphere, thawing frost from the frigid crust, methodically constructing the combustible fluid that serves as your sole avenue of escape from this sphere. Now, envision stepping outside one dawn, inspecting the dials, and discovering the reservoirs are merely at 50% capacity, perhaps a mechanical valve locked permanently several months prior. Maybe a global atmospheric disturbance blanketed the photovoltaic arrays significantly longer than the simulations anticipated. Conceivably, the subterranean frost proved to be situated further down and far more contaminated than the initial scans guaranteed. The specific cause is irrelevant. The reservoirs lack their required volume. They will fail to reach capacity before the deadline. Furthermore, the departure time frame, that singular, restrictive orbital synchronization that renders a transit to Earth remotely feasible, is rapidly shutting, not in the distant future, but within the current cycle. Additionally, no salvation is approaching. Assistance remains a minimum of half a year out, even assuming a relief mission lifted off at this exact second. Moreover, such a mission cannot even initiate because the two spheres are no longer geometrically synchronized. No supply depot exists. No backup vessel hovers in the upper atmosphere. No rescue team is riding to your aid. Only you remain, a partially depleted reservoir, a closing opportunity, an alien sphere that will anchor you precisely at your current coordinates with an endurance that never, ever depletes. You would observe that as your spec traverse your heavens and comprehend with absolute certainty that it may as well be a mere illusion. The most agonizing element is a complete lack of theatricality in the situation. No detonation, no siren, no solitary apocalyptic instant to direct your fury toward. Merely a dig on a dial that ceased rising, a day on a schedule ticking by, and the gradual, horrifying calculation that the two metrics would never intersect before the deadline. The cosmos would not need to execute any aggressive action to ensnare you. It would simply need to remain precisely as methodical and precisely as apathetic as it has perpetually been. At this juncture, allow me to be meticulously truthful with you, as a dedicated educator owes you transparency. Since this is a precise moment where superficial content deceives its audience, a practice I firmly reject. Absolutely nothing I have articulated implies that the fundamental rules of nature prohibit departing the red planet in the same absolute manner they prohibit exceeding the speed of light. No universal mandate brands a crimson sphere with a permanent quarantine. Each hurdle present, the gravitational depression, the mathematical formula, the combustible fluid you must extract from a sparse atmosphere, the time frame that refuses to pause, remains theoretically a technical challenge. Furthermore, humanity possesses a remarkable aptitude for resolving technical challenges. However, consider this crucial detail. It constitutes a technical dilemma piled atop another technical dilemma, all resting upon an unyielding celestial schedule. An extended sequence where every individual connection must remain intact simultaneously during the initial execution, offering absolutely no opportunity for a redo. You possess the ability to interpret that reality through multiple lenses. Frankly, I do not believe the laws of nature possess the right to make that selection on your behalf. You could perceive the hardship of departure as a variety of caution, an indicator that we are extending beyond the boundaries we were originally intended to inhabit, and that the barriers encasing every sphere exist for a purpose we have yet to comprehend. Alternatively, you might interpret it as a precise inverse, the absolute edge of discovery, valuable specifically because it demands such an exorbitant price while offering so few guarantees, representing the most authentic examination of our fundamental nature. Conversely, you could reject both narratives completely and maintain that the cosmos intends absolutely nothing by this arrangement, that gravitational force acts as neither arbiter nor sentinel, merely unfeeling, sightless mathematics, entirely apathetic regarding whether any entity ever scales the walls, and that the gateway appears unidirectional solely because we happen to be the variety of organism that yearns intensely to return to our origins. The laws of nature are incapable of selecting between those interpretations on your behalf. I consider that to be the most genuine and the most exquisite element of this entire scenario. Science can inform you down a fraction precisely how profound the pit runs, exactly what volume of propellant you would require, and precisely why the mathematics are so unforgiving. What it remains unable to disclose is whether a sphere you can access but never escape constitutes a snare, an examination, or merely a reality donning the disguise of significance that we transported there within our own minds. Consequently, ultimately, the inquiry pivots and directs itself back toward humanity rather than toward the celestial body. Are we the variety of organism that solely ventures to locations where it possesses absolute certainty of coming back? Or do we represent the sort of being that pauses before a gateway that might never unseal, that observes Earth dangling luminous and azure and unfathomably near across the celestial expanse, and elects to step across the threshold regardless, fully comprehending the potential price? I do not believe we possess the resolution at this moment. I do not suspect we can ascertain it while resting securely here on the solitary sphere in the cosmos that has not yet demanded we wager our return journey. It requires minimal effort to exhibit courage regarding a gateway while you remain planted on the side from which you originated. The authentic nature of our species solely unveils itself at the boundary, when the cost becomes tangible and the opportunity is finally expiring. I suspect the red planet represents the exact location where we would ultimately, inevitably discover the truth, where the civilization that has perpetually returned would ascertain for the initial time if it possesses the fortitude to visit a destination it might never depart. Therefore, gaze upward one concluding instance from the crust of that crimson sphere at the minuscule azure speck radiating consistently within the void. That speck represents your origin. Every individual who has ever harbored affection for you resides upon it. You are able to observe it flawlessly in that exact spot, more radiant than any celestial body, entirely distinct, near enough to extend a finger toward. Yet, separating you from that illumination rests an invisible barrier you might never successfully scale. The sheer magnitude of the terrain situated below your footwear. The unforgiving mathematics of the propellant you currently lack. The restrictive time frame that is presently sealing itself. It is not mileage. It never ultimately boils down to physical span. It is a pit far too profound, coupled with an apparatus you will be forced to construct from nothing, entirely in isolation, during your initial attempt. We journeyed to the lunar surface and returned because the satellite scarcely possessed the strength to retain us. It permitted our departure practically as an act of politeness. The red planet will exhibit no such benevolence. It stands as the initial sphere that might permit our touchdown, and subsequently, silently and eternally, retain our presence, not via any universal mandate that prohibits departure, but by demanding a toll so exorbitant that possessing capacity to visualize a route to Earth and possessing capacity to physically traverse it prove to be two fundamentally disconnected realities. That constitutes the gateway that swings open in a single direction. Should this have altered your perception of the crimson sphere by even the slightest margin, then remain in my company for an extended duration, as a subsequent inquiry I wish to examine at the absolute precipice alongside you is equally as bizarre as this concept. And the cosmos, as it perpetually remains, is currently